Welcome to the lecture on well-being, technology and inequality. Presently, we are discussing how technology and specifically ICT, instead of bridging the gap, is also increasing the gap, is rather increasing the gap. So, in this context, we can talk about gender divide. The digital gender divide is growing specifically among a particular section of society. In early 2017, in an alarming report that was issued by the International ITU, that is Telecommunication Union, demonstrated that the digital gender divide is growing rather than decreasing. And in global terms, the percentage of women with internet access was 12% lower than that of men. This holds true for different countries. In 2019, the world's billionaires, that numbered 2153, had more wealth than 4.6 billion people. This again indicates the kind of income inequality that was growing. The monetary value of women's unpaid care work globally for women aged 15 years and above was 3 times the size of the world's technical industry. Taxing an additional 0.5% of the wealth of the richest 1% over the next years could create 117 million additional jobs. So, these kind of data tell us about the rampant inequality that has been growing. And according to the Billionaires Insights Report 2020, Asia and Pacific region has the highest number of super rich. Almost 40% of the world's super rich fall in this region. It has 831 billionaires with wealth totaling 3.23 trillion US dollars. However, the irony is that Asia Pacific region has exceeded the Americas, which has 35%, and the Europeans, Middle Eastern and African billionaires, which have 27%. Now, on the basis of this, one could say that with so much of advancement in technology, with so much of wealth being created in this region, logically inequality should have decreased. Logically, the poor also should have benefited. However, the increased productivity did not mean that everyone made use of it, or there was a trickle down effect for all. The markets, if they are left to themselves, mean that only the minority, the super rich, are going to benefit out of it. And a very important statement that I would like to share here is that of Joseph Stiglitz, who said that can we adopt the policies that ensure that we can achieve shared prosperity. So, it is very important that the concept of shared prosperity is developed and adopted as part of the state policy. Now, the digital gap that exists all over the world is particularly pronounced in the developing countries, and the situation must be changed if women and girls are to benefit from digitization and if the UN's development goals on gender equality are to be achieved. If we do a cross-country survey incorporating countries like Brazil, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, and this survey pointed out that in the Human Development Report as well as and if you compare this with the developed countries like Germany and South Africa, there is clearly a digital gendered divide that is visible. Germany is among the top 10, whereas Ethiopia comes in towards the bottom of the table, yet their level of digital development shows the gender divide. So, the gender divide existed even in the developed country like Germany. The same holds true in terms of gender equality, with the social position of women and girls varying from country to country in terms of their legal, economic and cultural situations. So therefore, one must take into account the complexities of digital divide. Now, taking up the case of Brazil and an overview of inequality, according to the data from the Human Development Report 2016, Brazilian women stay in school longer than men, have a higher average level of literacy and a higher life expectancy. The overall workforce consisted of 57% women and 78% men. Only 10% of all members of parliament were women. And as per the 2014-15 Global Wage Report, there was a 24% salary gap between women and men. The Gini index, which is used to measure inequality and poverty, from 2013 ranked Brazil as one of the most unequal countries in the world, holding 13th place among 150 nations. The annual household survey of the Brazilian Center of Studies on Information and Communication Technologies documents that almost half of the country's population still had no access to the internet. Now, the next country that we can talk of was Ethiopia, the East African state which has been dominated by men who make the decisions on the money and also control access to mobile phones and the internet. In the World Economic Forum's 2016 Global Gender Gap Index, which analyzed gender equality in the areas of economy, education, politics and health, Ethiopia was ranked 109 out of 144. Ethiopian women are some of the poorest in the world. They rarely speak English and rarely leave the house and mostly are homebound. In comparison to other countries, Ethiopia also lags far behind when it comes to ICT usage. Less than 12% of women have internet access, and in rural areas, especially in the country's poorest regions, the situation is even worse. And again you see that the gender binary comes to play a very important role. Now, coming to Germany, on an international scale, Germany only ranks somewhere in the middle in terms of women's digital literacy. Very few women were involved in the development of ICT, even in a country like Germany. Only 15% of all employees in mathematical and technical professions were women, and women constituted only 20% of IT graduates. The investors and decision makers at venture capital firms were mostly men, and no women on the stage were there to provide with a more balanced perspective and opinion. So, visibility was a major issue even in a developed country like Germany. There were many qualified women in technology who could serve as role models, but either they were underappreciated in the broader social context, or they were underpaid. Women were mostly entirely excluded from the halls of fame. Wage discrimination still existed in Germany. Women were paid roughly 20% less than men for the same work, and a wage discrepancy of 24% existed in the ICT sector as per this survey. Then next, talking about Indonesia, women and girls, especially in the countryside, are structurally disadvantaged in terms of access to the internet. The traditional gender roles of Muslim majority society definitely prevail, and to maintain the house and to raise the children has remained the primary social responsibility of Indonesian women. Coming to South Africa, which has the strongest national economy on the continent, it attracts thousands of economic refugees from countries like Somalia, Burundi, Zimbabwe. Here, jobs, job safety and a better life are clearly manipulated and dominated by the rich and the powerful, and very small and especially white upper class monopoly is seen in all these sectors. And according to 2013 Gini Index, South Africa was marked by a profound social divide, ranking 4th on the list of the most unfair national economies. In fact, more than 50% of young women between the age of 16 and 25 were unemployed, as reported by this survey, and more than half of them lived below the poverty line. In South Africa, primarily in rural areas, men control most of the important services and also apps which can be used by their wives. Coming to the situation in India, of course, there is still prevalence of cultural conservatism, patriarchal values, very rigid caste norms, making India one of the least gender equal societies in the world. UNDP Gender Equality Index has rated India on place 130. Rape seems almost commonplace, and the political and judicial system is also unable to tackle this menace. In India, more than 60% of the population lives in villages, and access to internet is limited due to issues of coverage as well as affordability. Women make only 2% of internet users in rural areas, and many villages, according to this survey, in India have banned unmarried girls from using mobile phones. Access for married women also is highly restricted. Families often have male and female phones, while the male phones offer two-way communication and are used for work, networking, entertainment, and for some professional goals as well. They have a contact list, music, and however, the phones belonging to women the female phones are not considered private possessions but household devices. They are mostly hand-me-downs which can often only receive calls and are reserved for communication with kin and husbands. Mothers-in-law and village elders closely monitor the use of these phones. Then one can also talk about several apprehensions. When first introduced digital technology to women, they were very curious and also scared. However, some kind of peer training has gone a long way, and women become more receptive of taking up ICT if they are properly groomed and if the pros and cons of learning are also shared with them. Then there is the issue of resistance from family, from husbands as well as mothers-in-law, And also, even after learning a skill, even after becoming tech savvy, employment remains a distant dream, not only due to the problem of unemployment, but also due to social reasons, that the family is not ready to send their female members out for working. Here, a very important role can be played by NGOs and technical companies to target female users. And in fact, this has been the most important strategy for bridging the digital gender divide. Offices of several technical companies like Maya and Sheroes in Bangalore and Delhi have adopted this policy, and India has been increasing women's agency in this field and also bridging the digital gender divide. Now, talking about Maya, when started in 2012, it was launched in the US, Brazil and Mexico, but not in India, as it was thought that women here were not ready to use an app which tracks their menstruation cycle. John Paul, the founder of Maya, has discussed that how barriers which women encounter while using technology is specifically designed for them need to be dealt with. There is a lot of stigma attached to the issue of menstruation, and women have internalized that their own health is not of so much importance, but attempts are being made to change the attitudes, and Maya has successfully entered the Indian market, and suddenly women are reclaiming their space, and smartphones are driving this change. Then one also must talk about women only platforms. Several companies and communities have found that it helps to create women-only environments, and so for example, Sairi Chehel runs Sheroes, a platform helping women to find employment. So, the internet can be a constructive as well as an aspirational place, and it can also bridge the gap not only between the rich and the poor, but also the gender divide, which is so important to be bridged. Then Chehel explained the users of Sheroes that it's important to get connected to a network, and how they could be groomed by the coaches who would be giving them advice from time to time. The platform not only attracted well-educated professionals, but also rural women who were speaking in local languages. There is a need to create a safe and clean space. Virtual abuse is a major barrier for women. A number of campaigns such as Ready to Report, run by Amnesty International India, then have tried to motivate women to report abuse and to convince law enforcement to take such complaints that were made by women seriously, and not in a kind of falsehood, which is generally what is projected. Now, certain suggestions can be made to deal with the issue of inequality in ICT. Physical barriers which impede women's internet access must be dismantled. This includes high communication and data costs, as well as the necessity of creating safe spaces for women where they can use computers and also go online. Then there can be gender specific data on internet access and use that needs to be systematically gathered, tracked and processed. And this data also must be transparent and could also be used for devising and implementing several national policies. Digital literacy must be added to school curricula, and this applies equally to both the primary as well as secondary education, and specifically must cater to all the genders. Also, there is a need to make targeted and effective interventions that can foster the gender inclusion of women, girls, transgenders, LGBT community, etc. The digital inclusion of women must become a permanent agenda both in national as well as international plans and policies. Also, it is important not only to work with women, but also to take into confidence the gatekeepers. Here it means the parents, husbands, mothers-in-law, teachers, village elders, and region specific solutions must be developed, and the differences between the rural and urban areas must be taken into account. Also, the age gaps, income and ownership categories, all these must be taken into account to devise a more equitable policy. Then there is also a need to disseminate public information not only at national level but at local level as well. There is a need to promote services that are specifically tailored according to the living and working reality of the poor and marginalized. The services must be compatible with the local living and working conditions of women, and they must incorporate the constraints and the socio-cultural factors that still play a very important role. Systematically, there is a need to prosecute online violence against women and also set up simple reporting systems which are also responsive. There is a need to promote research, improve dialogue, promote qualitative research as well as support institutional adoption. There is also a need to collect more and more data and then also to reflect on how this digital transformation can be brought about and how the visibility of the marginalized sections can be improved through such attempts. There is a need to promote specific projects which encourage women and girls to develop technology, strengthen the freedom to choose what they want to focus on in their use of technology rather than adopting the approach of from above, ordering from above. It should be bottom up approach. Then there is also a need to understand the continuation of patriarchal culture which has stood so far in the way of women and girls studying and developing technological skills. In Germany also, the technical sector was rife with sexist remarks and women continued to be excluded, and startups and corporations continued to keep them away in order to maintain a work and family life balance. So therefore, we need to have more workshops teaching digital literacy, developing more apps that can guide the users through their guide the users over various subjects which are specific to women, for example menstruation, pregnancy, childbirth, several other digital products and services aimed at strengthening the lives, aimed at improving the lives of women, and also incorporating varied contexts and needs. So the providers need to understand the specific socio-cultural circumstances of the female audience, the market, and then also deal with the gatekeepers, the so-called socio-cultural parameters that are still very important in a traditional society like India. So, it is important not only to work with women, but to adopt the right strategy. Politics and legal framework need to support digital inclusion both in theory as well as in practice. Conscious digital strategies as well as legal protections must be used to prevent sexualized violence on internet. So, with these observations, I would like to end the discussion. Thank you.